had tears in her eyes as she took in a floral tribute that had amassed at a bench.
I still can't believe I'm saying this, but Ozzy Osbourne is gone, the Prince of Darkness, the man who defined chaos, who turned pain into performance, and somehow made madness feel like magic. And now, the world just stopped. No guitars, no drums, just silence. Like even rock and roll itself had to pause for a second and catch its breath. But here's the thing, this wasn't just a funeral, this was something else. Something way bigger than a goodbye. What happened behind those black velvet gates in the middle of the English countryside felt like the end of an era. No press, no paparazzi, just legends, real ones. I'm talking Paul McCartney, Elton John, even Ozzy's old rivals, all standing shoulder to shoulder in complete silence. And what they witnessed inside that chapel, it broke them. It broke everyone. This isn't just a story about Ozzy dying. This is about what happens when a legend leaves the stage, and the world answers with silence louder than any encore. So stick with me, because once you hear what really happened at Ozzy's final send-off, you'll understand why nobody could speak when it was over. The location no one could reach. Ozzy Osbourne's private estate, hidden deep within the misty folds of the English countryside, transformed overnight into something straight out of a Gothic fairy tale. Black velvet draped over iron fences like mourning banners, fluttering in the wind. Candlelit lanterns lined a winding gravel path, flickering like souls guiding the way to something sacred. Every corner of the sprawling estate whispered loss, yet it also pulsed with reverence. Massive floral arrangements of blood-red roses and dark orchids stood like sentinels by the gates. Drones hovered above like watchful crows, but not a single frame leaked, not one detail escaped. Security was tighter than the Grammys, armed guards stationed every few feet, aerial patrols scanning the skies, and not a single paparazzi flash in sight. It wasn't just private, it was impenetrable. Blacked-out SUVs glided through towering trees, their windows tinted darker than midnight, leaving no clue who sat inside. Some whispered that even the drivers had signed NDAs. As the cars passed, the hush outside grew heavier. Fans and press stood behind distant barriers, straining to hear even a note, a whisper, anything. But nothing came. There were no press releases, no live streams, no leaked guest list. Only the chosen few were allowed past those gates, selected not for their fame, but for their place in Ozzy's story. And the world outside could only wonder, because what was happening inside didn't just feel exclusive, it felt mythological. Like the kind of moment people would speak about in hushed tones for years to come, because they weren't just saying goodbye to a man, they were entering a legend, a family grieving in silence. The first to arrive was Sharon, frail, grieving, but unmistakably strong, the woman who had weathered every storm by Ozzy's side, from the chaos of addiction to the calm of late-night dinners in quiet halls. Dressed in simple black, her heels crunched against the gravel with a quiet finality. Her eyes, glassy but fierce, scanned the gates as if searching for him one last time. Her footsteps were slow but deliberate. At the iron archway she paused, reached into her coat and gently placed a single purple rose on the stone, Ozzy's favorite color, and a nod to the trademark glasses that had become his armor. No press, no statement, just a flower, and the silence of a woman who had loved him in his loudest and his quietest moments. Behind her, Jack and Kelly followed like shadows, silent, composed, but visibly shattered. Their faces were hidden behind Ozzy's signature round-tinted shades, but their posture said everything. Jack kept his head down, hands trembling slightly, while Kelly's lips pressed into a tight line, holding back a storm. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Grief had settled over them like the fog that blanketed the estate. Sharon turned once more to face the silent crowd gathered far beyond the gates. Fans, friends, strangers who had all come to witness this impossible moment. And then, with the grace of someone who knew exactly what it meant, she raised two fingers in a peace sign. Not for the cameras, not for the ceremony, but for Ozzy. The same symbol he had thrown to the sky so many times before, whether from a festival stage or a hospital bed. Around her neck, a delicate crucifix caught the light and trembled with each breath, as if it too were mourning. These weren't just rituals of goodbye. They were sacred, private codes, the kind only a family like the Osbournes could carry. Visual echoes of a man whose spirit still hung in the air like smoke after a show. The world hadn't yet heard the music, or the words, or the stories waiting inside that chapel. But right there at the gate, the real goodbye had already begun, and it was heartbreakingly human. Icons gather, legends in mourning. Then came the legends, one by one. History stepped out of tinted limousines and into silence. There were no cameras flashing, no shouted names, just the sound of gravel beneath polished shoes and the soft rustle of tailored coats brushing against the cold air. Paul McCartney emerged first, solemn and still, his posture upright but eyes heavy. Beside him, Elton John wore a midnight velvet suit with blood-red trim, a quiet scream stitched into every thread. They didn't speak, but their shared glance said everything. "We've lost one of our own." Johnny Depp followed, drifting through the mist like a shadow, his eyes hidden behind jet-black lenses, face unreadable, his presence haunting in its stillness. He clutched a single chain around his wrist, rumored to be a gift from Ozzy himself. Then came Slash, iconic top hat lowered slightly, guitar strapped across his back, not to play but to honor, like a soldier laying down arms for a fallen general. And then, a murmur swept through the crowd like wind through stained glass, as Lady Gaga appeared beneath a cathedral-length black veil, the fabric rippling like smoke. Arm in arm with Dave Grohl, she moved like a widow from another century, grief cloaked in elegance. Grohl, usually the beating heart of every room, looked carved from stone. James Hetfield arrived next, his face carved in silence, his hands clenched as if holding back a scream. Behind him came Eric Clapton and Zakk Wylde, brothers in sound, each carrying decades of shared stages and backstage memories. They exchanged no words, just a nod, small but seismic. Even the old feuds were buried that day. Gene Simmons, once Ozzy's onstage adversary in glam rock theatrics, stood near the entrance, eyes locked on the chapel door, nodding in quiet respect. Mick Jagger and Keith Richards, whose chemistry had outlived decades of tension, stood side by side, shoulder to shoulder, a rare and potent image of unity. There were no egos here, only reverence. And it didn't end there. Rami Malek, who embodied Freddie Mercury on screen, arrived not as Hollywood royalty, but as a humble guest. Jared Leto followed, dressed in subtle black, the rock star turned actor standing still among giants, not speaking, just absorbing the moment. It wasn't a red carpet, there were no spotlights, no flashes, no lines rehearsed. This was something else entirely, a sacred congregation, a brotherhood in black, united not by fame, but by loss. In those quiet, heavy steps, it was clear, this wasn't just a funeral, it was a requiem for an era. Inside the chapel, grief becomes ritual. Inside the chapel, time seemed to collapse, folding in on itself like pages in a book being closed for the last time. Everything was drenched in deep, reverent color. Crimson velvet lined the pews, catching soft candlelight that flickered like dying embers. The air was heavy, almost sacred, thick with the scent of lilies, myrrh, and Ozzy's favorite deep purple orchids, each one placed by hand, not florist. The silence wasn't just absence, it was presence, tangible, alive. At the altar rested a mahogany casket, rich and dark, its surface smooth as glass, and draped in flowing black silk. Embroidered into the fabric was a single silver bat with outstretched wings, the eternal emblem of the Prince of Darkness. No crosses, no nameplate, just that silver silhouette gleaming beneath the chapel's vaulted ceiling, like a sigil carved into myth. Sharon sat in the front row, unmoving, her posture rigid yet fragile. Her fingers wrapped tightly around a tiny crucifix that shook ever so slightly with each breath. A quiet prayer trembled on her lips, but never fully formed. Beside her, Kelly clutched her father's trademark round sunglasses. She wore them now, not as a fashion statement, but as armor. Her tears slipped beneath the lenses anyway, catching on her cheeks like starlight falling in slow motion. Jack sat beside them both, staring straight ahead. His jaw clenched, hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Then came the music. Not through speakers, not blasted from a stage. 4 figures stepped forward from the shadows. James Hetfield, Dave Grohl, Eric Clapton, and Zakk Wylde, each cradling a guitar like it was an extension of their soul. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Fingers found strings. Chords resonated like whispers from the beyond. It was no more tears, but stripped bare. No amps, no distortion. Just raw acoustic sorrow, each note a eulogy. The melody wept, and the room did too. Eyes closed, hands trembled. 1,000 memories seemed to flood every pew at once. Then behind the musicians, a screen lit up, not with pyrotechnics or stadium highlights, but with something far more intimate, grainy handheld footage. Ozzy, barefoot in his garden, laughing as he tried to chase his grandkids around the grass. His hair wild, his smile even wilder. No stage makeup, no leather, just shorts, socks, and unfiltered joy. Sharon watching from a porch chair. A dog barking somewhere off screen. The mundane magic of real life. The crowd didn't breathe. Not because they were holding back tears, but because that moment shattered every myth. For a second, Ozzy wasn't the Prince of Darkness. He was a husband, a dad, a barefoot grandpa with bad knees and a good heart. And in that raw display, grief morphed into something more, something sacred. This wasn't just a farewell. It was a ritual. A human goodbye wrapped in myth and memory. Something unforgettable. The moment that broke the room. And then it happened. The moment that shattered even the strongest. Without warning, a gospel choir rose from the shadows, dressed in flowing black robes with subtle silver embroidery, bats stitched near their hearts. They stood still for a breath. And then their voices, soft at first, trembled into the opening notes of Mama, I'm Coming Home. The harmonies weren't perfect. They weren't meant to be. They were human, raw, wounded. The melody floated through the chapel like smoke curling from a final candle, thick with memory and meaning. Grown men, legends, who once roared into microphones and smashed guitars under stadium lights, now stood frozen. Slash lowered his head, face hidden by his hat. Dave Grohl clutched his chest. Even James Hetfield's hands trembled. You could see it the moment it hit. The grief wasn't just public now, it was personal. Then, slowly, Sir Anthony Hopkins stepped forward. No music, no fanfare, just the steady echo of his shoes on sacred stone. Not as an actor, not as royalty, but as a friend, as someone who had laughed with Ozzy, listened to his fears, and watched the madness behind the curtain. He reached the podium, paused, and looked out, not at the crowd, but through them, into them. The room fell into a silence so deep, it bordered on holy. No phones, no flashes, just breathless reverence. And then he spoke. We don't mourn a man today, he began, his voice shaking, but not from fear, from weight. We honor a storm, a force of nature who thundered through our lives and left us breathless. The line didn't echo, it detonated. 6 words that sliced through the chapel like lightning across a black sky. For a split second, it was as if Ozzy himself had whispered them through Hopkins' mouth. And then something unthinkable happened. The room rose. Not for fame, not for image, not for performance, but for truth. Sir Paul McCartney stood first, placing a hand over his heart. Then Elton John, with tears streaking down his cheeks. Slash nodded at Zakk Wylde, who stood beside him like a brother. Gene Simmons wiped his eyes and embraced a silently weeping Keith Richards. No boundaries, no grudges, just shared grief. For once, the industry ego vanished. There were no stages, no managers, no press, just people, giants brought to their knees by the loss of one of their own. And in that moment, the music didn't matter. The record sales, the headlines, none of it. Because this wasn't a funeral anymore. It was a reckoning with legacy, with brotherhood, with what it means to burn so bright for so long that even your ending sets the world on fire. It was about reverence for a life too loud to be silenced, too real to be rewritten, and too sacred to be forgotten. A flame for the bat, and a movement begins. As the sun dipped below the trees, casting long shadows across the estate, the final moment unfolded in the garden, where time felt suspended. At the center stood a towering iron sculpture, unlike anything ever seen at a memorial. It wasn't a tombstone, it was a monument, wings stretched wide, mid-flight, frozen in defiance, a bat soaring skyward, cast in blackened steel. Just above its head, carved in solemn iron, gleamed the Black Sabbath logo, weathered as if it had always been there waiting for this moment. The air was thick, not just with incense and candle smoke, but with emotion, memory and awe. Then she stepped forward, alone, Sharon, no entourage, no spotlight, just a widow facing the weight of an era. In her hand, a small torch, its flame quivering like a heartbeat. The crowd behind her held their breath, some with hands over mouths, others gripping rosaries or worn leather jackets marked with Ozzy's emblem. She knelt, touched the flame to the base of the statue, and ignited the eternal fire. Instantly, the sculpture lit from within, embers glowing through the veins of the wings, illuminating the garden in a soft, almost supernatural glow. It wasn't just symbolic, it was spiritual. Behind her, the choir returned, not in full voice, but in breathy harmony. No melody, just a chilling whisper that seemed to ride the wind itself. Changes in the wind, over and over, like a mantra passed between the leaves and the stars. There were no speeches, no clapping, no phones, no noise, just stillness. And beyond the gates, miles from the ceremony, hundreds of fans had gathered, from all walks of life. Leather-clad bikers, teenagers with eyeliner and combat boots, old rockers who'd followed him since the 70s. Some lit candles in silence, others softly sang Dreamer under their breath. A few held radios playing Crazy Train on loop. But most didn't say a word, because they didn't need to. In that silence, in that heavy sacred quiet, Ozzy's presence was louder than any concert, more electrifying than any encore. It wasn't just the end of a life, it was the beginning of a movement. A moment where rebellion met reverence, where darkness finally turned to flame. The world responds. A blackout for Ozzy. The moment the final note faded and the chapel doors closed, the world didn't move. It responded, not with noise, but with reverence. Across continents, radio stations simultaneously dropped their regular programming without warning. No DJs, no commercials, just Ozzy. 12 straight hours of his voice, screaming, growling, whispering, played like a sacred liturgy. From Birmingham to Tokyo,
Los Angeles to São Paulo, cars pulled over, shopkeepers stood in their doorways, and strangers made eye contact as changes or Dreamer poured from speakers like prayers. Streaming services followed. Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube. Every homepage went dark. No flashing ads, no trending playlists. Just one banner, in all caps across a black screen. Ozzy Osbourne. Below it, a single button. Play everything. Fashion houses in London, Milan, and New York launched tribute collections overnight. Not flashy, not performative, just real. Vintage cuts inspired by his stage wear, jackets lined with stitched lyrics, and across every tag, the same message: all proceeds donated to mental health foundations. It was a nod to the battles Ozzy faced, and never pretended he didn't. Social media went still. Not because it was told to, but because no one knew what to say. Accounts big and small posted black squares, no captions, or sometimes just a single line. The loudest silence I've ever felt. A phrase born in a tweet, echoed in millions of reposts, and eventually seen on marquees, murals, and candlelit signs outside concert halls. There were no marketing campaigns, no sponsored tributes, just grief. Raw, just gratitude. Deep, just legacy. Untouched by algorithms, but felt everywhere. In Times Square, billboards went blank. In Tokyo, silent crowds gathered outside record stores. In São Paulo, fans set up amplifiers and played Crazy Train on vinyl for hours, handing out free earplugs and tissues, because it was that loud and that emotional. The world didn't just mourn Ozzy. It blacked out for him, paused, reflected, respected, because when a voice that loud goes quiet, you feel it in your bones. This was never just about a rocker dying. It wasn't about the fame, the chaos, or even the music alone. It was about rebellion, redemption, legacy. Ozzy Osbourne didn't just live loud, he lived true, unfiltered and unapologetically human. And that's why his story doesn't end here. Because legends don't die, they echo. In every guitar riff that rattles your chest, in every lyric that speaks your truth, in every moment you choose to be real in a world full of noise. So if this story moved you, drop a comment with your favorite Ozzy memory, blast his music like he's still on stage, and hit subscribe for more stories that don't just inform, they hit you where it matters. Because silence may come for us all, but Ozzy proved that a voice like his can shake the world forever. So let's not let the silence win. Crank up the volume. Revisit the riffs. Remember the man who turned darkness into anthems. Drop your favorite Ozzy lyric, moment, or memory in the comments. We want to hear it. Share this video with someone who needs to feel it. And if you haven't already, hit the like button and subscribe. Because around here we don't just tell stories, we keep legends alive. Ozzy may be gone, but his echo, that's forever.